I'm not gonna kill you. I'm just gonna review you really, really bad. The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching and listening to this review. Hello, folks. Welcome back to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. It's the Superhero Rewind podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at Suicide Squad, both the theatrical and extended cuts. I took a look at both for this review. 2016, only 6 years ago, and in some ways, it feels like 16 years ago. This is quite the relic now, which is such a weird thing to say because it seems like a movie that is both really influential and everybody has forgotten about and doesn't talk about all at the same time. It's a weirdly, I hesitate to say important movie because it's a thing that we got past very quickly, and yet there's a lot of iconography and stuff from this movie that was really popular for a minute that everybody remembers, and I still see like the Harley Quinn suit from this at conventions and things, at Halloween stores. Like, the culture has kept a hold of certain superficial parts of this movie, but as a movie, it doesn't seem to be a thing that people go back to, a thing that's really appreciated and lauded, and we've already made a kind of rebooty sequel to it that people seem to like a whole lot more. This is a movie that more than made its money back, did really well at the box office, so much so that of course, it got that sequel. I don't think, unless you want to think of it as a sort of, original movie, like halfway kind of in the same continuity. The whole DCEU is really confusing and complicated, and I keep talking a lot on the channel about just all the baggage that this thing still has. And so, as I say, it feels like a weird kind of artifact from another time, and like we're already decades past it somehow. It's such a strange movie because it's both a success, at least commercially it's a success, but it's also this massive failure that, just like with BVS, the Warner Brothers and DC were kind of scrambling very quickly to figure out how to kind of recuperate from it. Like, oh no, once again, a thing that's not critically liked that dropped off at the box office. Nothing like BVS, and again, it made over $700 million. I don't know that they were going, if our movies don't make $1 billion, they're not a success. But once again, Warner's was really a reactionary right after this, just like with BVS, and being as reactionary as they were after Batman vs. Superman is a lot of why this movie turned out the way it did. Although it's difficult to say what a straight-up David Ayer cut would look like. This, to a much lesser degree than Justice League, has that release the director's cut thing with Justice League, the Snyder cut, with this, the Ayer cut, and there's not, of course, as much information and as much talk that there's this, very, very different cut that we never got to see. And just like with Batman vs. Superman, we got an extended cut, but it's not a straight-up director's cut, and it's got new footage added. It makes the story a little bit more, I don't even want to say make more sense, except for maybe the Joker Harley stuff. And that's not even really a matter of making more sense, I guess, is just giving them a little bit more character dimension, or starting them from a place that's a little bit more traditional, and then getting them to what's described in the featurettes on the disc as kind of a Bonnie and Clyde relationship. But unlike with BVS, it does. The extra footage there did make the story a little bit more whole, I guess. Here, it gives some of the characters a little bit more dimension and some better lines of dialogue and stuff, but it also just kind of elongates the whole the whole experience in a not at all necessary way. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's at least not BVS length. It's at least not this big 3-hour cut. But once again, it's this unfinished movie that, or just a weird release of a movie where it feels like there's stuff left on the cutting room floor, and like maybe it made a little bit more sense in the script whether everything that needed to be filmed was ever actually filmed. But we get an extended cut that doesn't make it all that much better, and just makes it kind of more of a chore to watch, I think. And it's also always strange to me to have, and the MCU is now doing this with Spider-Man No Way Home, and I don't know if they've done this before. I can't think of a situation. I don't like it when a shared universe does this, or when you have, a continuity where there's multiple movies and you get an extended cut, because there's always the question of which is the cut that actually counts and is in continuity and that we're supposed to be paying attention to, particularly if there's ever scenes that contradict anything that's in the original cut. But anyway, so going to attempt some story analysis on this. Thanks very much for joining me. If you're watching live, I'll be taking questions and chatting with you a little bit later in the show, or actually quite a bit later in the show. I'm going to give you all of my initial notes, and then I'll chat with you guys if anybody has a particular topic to do with Suicide Squad that you want to make sure that I tackle here that I don't get to in my main points, my main notes. Feel free to leave a super chat in any dollar amount. I'll guarantee that I'll do that with those, and you can leave regular comments as well, and I'll try to get to at least a couple of those. Thanks for watching after the fact as well. If you're doing that, you guys are wonderful. Really appreciate you being here late with me once again on a Sunday night. So 2016 was a really interesting year because it was kind of the year of the anti-hero and of superheroes fighting each other. And it was almost even more the year of the anti-hero because Sony was trying to get out a Sinister Six movie for that same year, if memory serves, and that didn't end up actually happening. But this was DC once again trying to catch up to Marvel in every way possible, so they seemed obsessed with getting team movies out. The big ticket is The Avengers, is a big crossover movie with a bunch of different characters. Never mind whether we've seen very many of these characters before or not, just make it feel like a big event. And so this continues, and in some ways kind of starts the trend of most DCEU movies having to be a big team movie and a team building movie. And I always put BVS in that category, which is why I say it continues that trend, because that movie can't just be Batman and Superman. It's also got to establish with cameos the idea of the Justice League. And this is continuing to do that with a real quick glimpse once again at Grant Gustin's Flash. Stuff like that is so strange. It feels like we should have seen him already in a movie. This is pre-Justice League, in case you don't know the timeline with all of this. And anyway, so another way that DC felt like they had to try to catch up to Marvel is let's do, and really early, it's so counterintuitive, I think, let's try to get out a movie about anti-heroes. And we'd already had Guardians of the Galaxy, which arguably watches a little bit like that, although I've always said it kind of turns more into a flat-out, straight-up superhero thing by the end. They're still not like stalwart, always do the right thing kind of superheroes, but they're more or less heroes by the end of that movie, and I've always thought that it earns it in a way that this doesn't. This attempts to do exactly the same thing, and isn't that kind of ironic, given that a few years later, the same guy who made Guardians, which this in numerous ways is ripping off, especially with that ending, the same guy who made that, James Gunn, will make The Suicide Squad, which does a lot of the same things this movie does, but better, and he doesn't have to go back and rip off his own movie to do it. He just is right for these kinds of things. But yeah, Year of the Anti-Hero. You've got Deadpool, which is, I think, a much, much better movie than this, and it's much more cohesive, and I'm more interested in its protagonist, and he doesn't have to turn into a straight-up hero by the end in order for that movie to tell a good story, and I've always felt like Deadpool doesn't take quite enough risks, but it certainly takes more than this. And so this ends up being kind of DC's not very good Deadpool in the same way that BVS was kind of DC's not very good Civil War. You've got, so good job, DC. You got from the same company a sort of, and I don't want to say those are exactly the same movies, of course, but kind of in some ways lesser versions of better Marvel things, be it MCU Marvel or Fox Marvel, that came out the same year. Another thing that I think DC really wanted to do was make sure and get Harley Quinn in a movie as fast as possible in order to, I think for lots of reasons, kind of make history. Here's a big character we have that we know people love that we've never put on screen before, so that'll get butts in the seats. She's related to the Joker. The Dark Knight was huge, and that will get butts in the seats, and we haven't had a female-led superhero, anti-hero, however you know, whichever thing you want, a kind of movie yet, and Marvel hasn't beaten us to that, even though they had every opportunity, and to something we talked about last week, I think we can thank Perlmutter for that whole thing. So they have kind of every reason to want to get Harley Quinn out kind of early. And I think the reason that such a counterintuitive choice was made, that you would do an ensemble movie, a team thing with a bunch of supervillains as your third movie in your new DC extended universe, is because this was a project that was already in development before the DCEU happened. All the way back to 2009, Warner Brothers was kicking around a Suicide Squad movie, and they were back then with Watchmen and several other things, V for Vendetta, lots of, and not all of them written by Alan Moore originally. You had a lot of DC properties that were being turned into kind of R-rated or darker, harder PG-13 things, stuff like Constantine, that DC was making as their own solo individual projects that didn't have anything to do with a grander universe. And when Man of Steel happens and then BVS, I guess they thought, okay, well, we've been working on the Suicide Squad thing, let's rope it into the DCEU and make it part of that whole thing. And so I don't think this would have happened if they weren't already kind of getting the ball rolling on a Suicide Squad thing. And looking back on it, I think David Ayer would have made a much tighter movie, and probably something that was a little more character-driven, and would just hold together better as a piece, maybe would have its own unique, a little bit more of its own unique, not as confused tone, if only it hadn't had to be tied to the DCEU. It feels like his hands were tied behind his back a little bit with Snyder as kind of the executive producer of the DCEU, because this feels more like a Snyder film than it does a David Ayer film. Not that I'm super familiar with Ayer, but I think a lot of people were excited about him on this movie because he just generally makes and writes better movies than this ended up turning out. And I think that's why a lot of people think that there's this much, much better cut of this. Having looked at some of the behind the scenes, I'm very skeptical of that, because one of the problems, and I'm getting ahead of myself, we'll talk about this later, but one of the problems this movie has is that not enough of it is written down in the first place. This is another one of those, let's have a kind of cookie cutter grand plan, kind of broad plan, and let our very funny ensemble cast make up a lot of their dialogue on the spot. And kind of interesting that it comes out the same year Ghostbusters 2016 does. This is more planned than that. It's more plotted than that movie, and there's no dancing, thank goodness, but it does kind of have that a little bit. I think it sits somewhere between Ghostbusters 2016 and Thor Ragnarok, but this, of those three, is the only one that doesn't have Thor, that doesn't have Chris Hemsworth. So, like I said, we've got this extended cut. It is a little bit better than the original in some ways. I think if I were going to go back to this again, this would be the cut I would watch for no other reason than the drinking scene, the bar scene, is a little bit better here because it gives everybody a little bit more of a moment, and that that's kind of the only scene that a couple of our characters really get any character work at all. Okay, so as we always do, let's go ahead and get into themes with this, and this is going to be one of those movies where it's going to be hard not to read into things that are either not there enough or are just kind of hand-waved, thrown at us and nothing is done with, or potential themes, potential ideas that we could have run with. I'm going to be skirting this whole review around not rewriting the movie, because there's a lot of potential here that the movie does not take advantage of. So again, with themes, I'm going to talk about things that are actually in the movie and things that probably ought to be, and stuff that's just mentioned one time and never again. It's like, why is the movie not about that? Thanks a lot, Bob the Hun, for the super chat, and I will get to it after my initial notes. So first of all, we have, of course, the theme of, or I guess the question of why people become criminals in the first place. Insanity versus the conscious choice to break the law. And there's this idea in the movie that there's a line that is skirted, and we're supposed to be questioning different characters' sanity, I think. So you have Harley Quinn, who we're told is basically just bat stuff insane, and yet she's got more than just moments of lucidity, and she's one of the most capable, one of the most competent people on the team, and she and Deadshot kind of run the team together, partly just because I think she's the most popular character in the movie, so she's got to be very important, so she and Deadshot team up. But then Deadshot, by contrast, seems much more sane than Harley Quinn, and yet he's got this whole motif, this whole motivation of killing because he likes it to some degree. Yes, he does it for money, and yes, he has some compassion because he has a daughter that he cares about and is heartbroken to not be able to get back to, and yet he claims that he's incapable of love because, after all, how could someone who enjoys putting the mask on and shooting people at a distance because he never misses, how could that person also love anyone? And that's another big motif, of course, especially between those two, is what is real love, and are either of these people actually capable of it? I think thematically it is more Deadshot and Harley Quinn's movie than it is anybody else. I think in practice, the story itself cannot decide who the real main characters are. It keeps randomly putting people in front of us as if we're supposed to care about them more than we do, and it kind of gives people real easy throwaway character arcs. It really feels like it should be Harley Quinn and Deadshot's movie, and everybody else is there to kind of serve their story. I'll also say that one of the things that the Suicide Squad gets so much more right than this is juggling an enormous cast of many, many characters, and it understands that. It makes that story more about 2 or 3 characters than anybody else, which also, with the premise of Suicide Squad, you've got a bomb in your head, you're being forced, you're a criminal, and you're being forced to go on a mission by your government, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you want your brain to explode. So we should be, through the whole movie, wondering who will live and who will die. And Gunn took that idea and made a whole movie out of it. And there's never really any question. I mean, I think there's supposed to be, but I didn't, even the first time I saw this, find myself going, oh gee, I wonder who will make it and who won't. And I also don't know how much I cared, really, or at the very least, there were 3 or 4 characters that you knew there was no way would end up dying. We'll talk about the Slipknot thing here after a little bit. But anyway, other themes: necessary evil versus the excuse to be horrible. Sometimes it starts as doing the wrong thing for the right reasons and becomes power corrupting in a way to justify giving in to your dark side, which seems to be what Amanda Waller is. She seems to have completely lost her humanity, and she can justify anything by saying it's for the greater good. By contrast, you have the Joker, who, of course, is all chaos. Not that the movie does enough with him at all, but just thematically with the characters that are here, I'm seeing what we can possibly do with their presence, because in execution, I think it watches a lot more like just a bunch of characters we decided to throw in a movie together. So I'm not saying that any of the stuff thematically that I'm talking about right now, the movie is especially adept at, but it's all potential stuff that we could do more with. So she's all about order. Joker is all about chaos. Both of them are pure evil, I think is supposed to be the idea. And then all of the Suicide Squad characters in the middle are thought of as monsters. Society believes they're monsters, and we're supposed to learn throughout the movie that they're all simply broken and damaged individuals. It's unfortunate that a lot of the words that I might want to use to describe characters in this movie show up someplace on somebody as a tattoo. This movie is not subtle about any of this stuff. There's not a great deal of subtext. It has to come right out and spell all of its ideas, and I don't know that I've ever seen anything else that does this. Sometimes it's exposition and dialogue. Much more often, it's simply a person has a character trait, and they're wearing it on their forehead. Then there's the question of what lengths should government go to control individuals that have too much power? Should we trust the judgment of authority to do this? And it's kind of X-Men again, especially with Diablo. Then we're kind of continuing the theme that we had in Batman vs. Superman, at least at the beginning. We get away from that really quickly. There's all this talk at the beginning of the movie, for the first 20 minutes that shouldn't even be in the movie. Before the film actually begins, we get kind of a boring cartoon before the movie that tells you about all these characters that you're then going to meet, and will ruin all of their introductions. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We get all this discussion at the beginning about what if Superman wasn't on our side. Never mind that should still kind of be a question, I think. What did Superman in this universe really stand for? But I spent 5 hours on Batman vs. Superman last year, and I'm not going to talk too much about that here. We are retconning a little bit what that looked like and how divided people were in society about Superman and who he was and whether we could trust him. But we kind of forget about that pretty quickly. It stops being about that once it's more about cleaning up Amanda Waller's mess, which admittedly is kind of a neat reveal in the middle. It's handled in a really jarring sort of way. But it does kind of suck that we lose that whole motif, because it would have continued what BVS was trying to get at, which is the question of, can we trust people with power, or should we be afraid of them regardless of what their motives seem to be? Then we have this throwaway line where nothing else, as far as I can tell in the movie, has anything to do with this. It's dropped one time. It's never talked about it again. But this idea of evolution of religion, that people will always find gods in something, even if they don't worship idols or trust in an ancient book that gives them the morality. Enchantress says, now they worship machines. They used to worship us, the gods. Now they worship machines. So I'll build a machine. And then it doesn't explore that idea at all. It's just a throwaway villain motivation, kind of like Steppenwolf will have in Justice League. There's some other weird things about the kind of big CG villains that show up in these movies that I'll talk about later. And then there's the really sappy idea that you get at the end that I don't think the movie earns at all, that no matter what you've done, it's not too late to find your heart. There's kind of a heart motif, not in exactly the Tony Stark kind of way, but there's almost like this weird perverse version of that with the Enchantress, where she has a physical heart that conveniently was buried right next to her so that Amanda Waller could find it. And if you puncture holes in it enough times, she will die. But the idea, I think, is supposed to be she is just an ethereal, if not pure evil creature, just a kind of godlike entity that can't help control her own nature and what she is. And she doesn't have real compassion, even though she's willing to give anyone kind of the easy life that they want, sort of a la the Nexus in Star Trek Generations. And she doesn't really care about you. She just pretends that she does so that she can get what she needs from you. And I don't know, I just thought of this, but in kind of an interesting way that makes her almost like an anti-Amanda Waller, but I don't know that that's intentional at all. But anyway, I guess the idea is supposed to be that our heroes, or our anti-heroes, even though they don't think they do or realize it, actually do have a heart and are capable of mustering at least some degree of compassion and caring about other people by the end of the movie. And you have this character with a physical, like, black evil heart that doesn't have that. Can't do a lot with that. I'm just acknowledging things that I observed in the movie. Okay, let's talk a little bit about character motifs now. Each of our main characters embodies, I say main, I mean, there are characters that not a lot is done with, that are almost like glorified cameos that really should have either been written out of the movie or killed somewhere. Especially because, and I'm saying this in hindsight, and I'm saying this in a continuity where we keep retconning things and rebooting stuff, but a lot of these characters are never going to come back and we're never going to do anything with them, so they might as well have been killed off here. Like Killer Croc, why not just kill him? Look, Austin the Day Ghost, I know you love Killer Croc, but we don't do anything with him here. I also know that you don't like this Killer Croc. Anyway, each of our characters embodies a different flaw that serves as his or her greatest strength. So it's my greatest weakness is also my greatest strength. It's the contradiction of the human condition. It is our flaws that make us who we are. Unfortunately, with this movie, none of these characters really transcend that. So there's a lot of kind of superficial like emotional manipulation, at least, I say a lot, at least at the end, in trying to make the audience believe that these characters are more well-rounded and more layered than they really are. They're really just defined by one big gaffe, one big flaw, one big mistake. And then by the end, generically, we're a family, and we love each other, and I guess we're actually human after all. So, the reason they're put into prison is also the reason that Waller needs them. The squad are all human beings with massive mental issues, but they're not evil like Waller and the Joker. So, I do this a lot with Rewind, but you've got Waller on one side, you've got the Joker on the other side. Chaos, order, but evil chaos and evil order. I guess chaos could arguably maybe always be evil, and fascism also is that way. And then in between, you have these characters that, again, are thought of as monsters who really aren't, even though Waller calls Croc a monster, and he's a cannibal, and he eats people. So, I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made. So, here are those flaws. Each of them, I think, represent something that or maybe are supposed to represent a major character flaw that's kind of prevalent in society. So Deadshot has this mental complex where he doesn't like that he kills people because he enjoys it. He resists that, but that really is what it is. So maybe he's borderline serial killer. By the way, I like Will Smith's performance in this quite a bit because he's always charming and I generally like him and stuff, and he is actually better at the improv than some other actors in this. But, and actually, I should also say real quick, I don't mean to run off the rails, but there's a lot of not great dialogue in this. The bigger issue is just that it's so thinly plotted that it's relying too much on that stuff. Not so much you've got, scenes that like linger and like go on for too long, like a Ghostbusters 2016, before people because people are improvising. I actually think that some of the improvising is better in this than in some other things in more recent years that have attempted this. It's just a thing that feels kind of rushed and thrown together, or at least that's my perception of it. That's what it looks like. But anyway, so Deadpool kills because he enjoys it, but he also cares about his daughter, and he is able to hold on to some degree of his humanity because he has that. And then you have Harley Quinn, whose big thing is codependency. She finds her confidence and value in being subservient to another person. We will very quickly get away from that when we get to Birds of Prey. That's no longer in vogue. It feels like this is the last year that movies are trying to get away with certain things that we used to do a lot of. There's a lot of kind of, and I'll bring this up again too, but there's some kind of gratuitous over-sexualization that happens with Harley Quinn that was always a part of her character that that we're going to try really hard to move away from after this. And it's way too in your face and way too gratuitous in this. And then by the time we get to Birds of Prey, it goes the other way where she just feels like a completely different character and is also not all that interesting. She is unhinged, but still has empathy, but perhaps that's only because of her psychology training. That's the thing I picked up on this time that I don't know if it's intentional, but the idea that the Joker broke her and made her as nuts as he is. You have that terrible line from Waller that she's even crazier than the Joker. She's even more insane, more ruthless than he is. Okay. And I wonder if the idea is supposed to be that she doesn't actually still have a lot of empathy. You see flashes of what has to be real empathy with Deadshot. I don't know if the movie really earns that. I don't know how much of that I buy. But beyond that, it seems like what else there is maybe just what she was taught in school. And she still retained that, even though she's been transformed into a whole other entity by the Joker. And that's a potentially interesting thing that we don't really explore. You have Diablo, who has a temper he can't control, so he became a pacifist. He's the only squad member who got his problem in check, but he has to regress in order to save the world. He can use his demons for good because he recognizes them and already overcame them. Your demons never leave you. And I kind of like the idea of having that, it's a little too typical at the end, but that kind of self-sacrificial character who has sort of already been through his character arc and figured things out and now has to show his fellow squad members the way at the end. He's, by the way, weirdly the most sympathetic and likable character in the movie, and I like that actor's performance a lot. And I remember seeing that the first time and going, I don't even know who this guy is. And it was so weird when he shows up. Like, who the heck is Diablo? Apparently, he was only like a 5 or 6 year old character. He starts in 2010, 2011. And then I walked out of the theater going, he was kind of the only person I liked. And then you have Boomerang, who I really can't give you much of a read on beyond he likes being a jerk. He's kind of a bully. He wants to see how far he can push people. And then because everybody else becomes a family at the end, he kind of has to also. He's one of those characters that plays comic relief in a comedy. Another thing I meant to mention earlier is that Warner Brothers and DC seemed to think it was important to prove that the DCEU wasn't humorless. Unfortunately, they did it with a kind of black comedy like this that is sort of vulgar on purpose, and your kids really shouldn't see it, even though it's PG-13, and of course, just like BVS, the extended cut is R. It's really straddling that line and wants to be a rated R thing. And maybe if they wanted to prove that these movies could have some heart in them and that it wasn't going to be all, a brooding fest and really really dark, or just, no fun at all, maybe we should have done it with something this early that was more for all ages, unless the idea was supposed to be that all of the DCEU was for, older teenagers and above. But then you get to Wonder Woman, and that movie doesn't really play that way. And then beyond that, and even Justice League, the initial version that they put out, isn't that way, but they've already started pivoting, so that's part of it also. You got Rick Flag, who is, of course, not a squad member in the sense that he has the bomb in his head, but he still fits in with all of this because he's supposed to be another pretty flawed character. He's in his loyalty. He's got like a flawed loyalty. So he'll do whatever he's told for service for his country, doesn't ask questions. So that's the way in which he's flawed. And then you have Katana, who is a loyal servant to a single master, who is Amanda Waller, and doesn't ask questions. And that's really the only difference between those characters, besides the fact that, well, and then each of them have a motivation that is about somebody that they really care about. That's the other thing, is that some of the squad members are motivated by love. Again, it gets real sappy by the end. Love for a lover, or love for a family member. And then some of them we just don't know anything about at all, and who knows what motivates them beyond they're in the Suicide Squad, they have a bomb in their head. Killer Croc looks like a monster, is treated like a monster. Amanda Waller has to come out and say that, because I wouldn't have understood that if she hadn't said it. And he acts like one but isn't. Apparently, he is a cannibal because it gives him people's power. I don't understand that. In the behind-the-scenes featurettes, which are very, very interesting with this one, there is a lot of, there's a little bit of talk with Killer Croc that he is supposed to be like the early Killer Croc, where he's not actually a giant crocodile, he's just a guy with a skin condition. And I'm going, okay, but how come he has this superpower where if he eats you, he gets your power? And if that's true, how come we never really see him use it? I guess because we don't have enough characters in this with superpowers, so it would be difficult to visually do anything with that, to realize that. But yeah, real quick, I'll talk about the special features, because it's very depressing looking at them, because this Blu-ray release really thinks that you like this movie. Obviously, these things are put together, or starting to be put together, I would assume, before the thing even goes to the theater, and you have all these featurettes that are being put together while they're making the movie. And yes, sometimes you have actors and directors and writers and producers that in behind-the-scenes featurettes are selling the thing really well and putting on their game face, and they know what they're making, and it's not good, but they have to sell the product, so they're pretending, and they're putting on a good show for you. I don't think for the most part that's happening here. I think everybody involved thinks that there's something really kind of special that they're putting together, and that it was an experiment that just didn't work. And I don't want to say that it makes me like the movie more or dislike the movie less, but I feel worse for some of the people involved, because I think all the actors had a really good time making this, and I believed that watching the featurettes. I feel like sometimes you can kind of tell when they're pretending they're not, especially because there is a little bit of tiptoeing around some of the turmoil behind the scenes with this movie, because there is a surprising lack of discussion of Jared Leto, and when he comes up, it's just people saying how impressive his method acting is. Of course, nobody's talking about him sending them rats in boxes and crazy method crap like that he did that would affect other people and make them uncomfortable, which you shouldn't go that far. I don't care how method you are and how much you have decided that you're letting this character take you over. You've still got to be able to control yourself enough to not let it go as far as Leto let it go in this movie, especially because I think most of us agree it wasn't worth it for the product. He's not even that important in this movie. Half his scenes, I don't even know why they're there. But you had, and I had forgotten about this, most of these actors got a tattoo, like they tattooed each other. Because this thing is all about tattoos. I kind of have a read on the tattoos that I'll get to later, where they wrote Squad, S-K-W-A-D, on each other. And you're not going to do that unless you feel like you're becoming, a family on the set. And I think it's really sad that the actors seem to have really bonded and became kind of a family on the set when that's what's supposed to be happening with the characters, and it really didn't. So that's unfortunate. Hey, let's talk a little bit about some superhero movie cliches and tropes that I found in this movie. You got to have the giant vortex in the sky at the end. The DCEU has not gotten the memo yet that we're done with that. Everybody's sick of that. We're still making fun of Marvel about it. Maybe it's time not to do that unless you have, for some reason, a really good reason. You gotta have a huge mystical creature that the heroes have to fight at the end. And they also have to be in really poor CG with unconvincing facial expressions. Why do so many DCEU movies have that? Even as they start pivoting in different directions and trying different strategies, they're still doing that. Even Wonder Woman, which is a movie I like, has that. You have to have your cute forced origin for the name of the team and the name of the movie. Some kind of Suicide Squad, which is kind of infamous now. A line that I think Will Smith delivers as naturally as possible, and also a thing I'm pretty sure was written down and was not an ad-lib. You got to have one big name actor to give it credibility. Here, that's Will Smith. There's a lot of superhero movies that do that, for better or worse. You got to have a leader who is ultimately responsible for creating the threat, kind of like a year later you'd have with Zordon and Power Rangers from 2017, which was the runner-up movie on the poll for this week. I almost ended up doing that today. You have with Will Smith's character, with Deadshot, who of course people lament all the time is really not like the Deadshot in the comics, and that's not a character I'm super familiar with, but even I knew this guy's not really Deadshot. He's got that Sandman thing a little bit. I have a daughter, that makes it okay for me to break the law. It's not exactly that, but I had a hard time not thinking about that even the first time I saw this movie. You gotta have that slow motion money shot of the whole team strutting toward the camera. And finally, you have to have a villain who offers the heroes what they want or to join them so that they will leave him or her alone and they can accomplish their evil goal. Let's talk now about, you know what, actually, I'm going to go ahead, since I've been talking for a little while, and tackle the super chat, and then I'll get to some things I liked in this movie. Let's do that. Bob the Hunt, $5 super chat, says, thoughts on Harley Quinn being sexed up? Would never get away with that now. I did talk about that a little bit already. Birds of Prey is rated R, and it makes her less sexy than the PG-13 film. Yeah, some of that is, of course, the sensibilities of the day and how things are rapidly changing. So I don't want to get into the politics of it, but obviously it became really taboo for mainstream movies to over-sexualize, and even sometimes I would say just sexualize female characters. And a lot of that has to do with the Me Too movement and that kind of thing. It will be interesting to see if at some point it levels out and it becomes a little bit more okay again. I don't mean for really super gratuitous stuff, but just to have, you know, women who dress a little bit more promiscuously and that kind of thing in movies. It goes way too far in this, and it was uncomfortable and obnoxious, and I don't like a lot of the costume choices in this, I should say, because I think a lot of it is just too busy, and it's really kind of trite. It's, oh, these are criminals, so they have to have 1 million tattoos, and they have to wear all this kind of gangster street stuff. And again, there's a lot of ideas that I think I might have been able to get one over on, like the idea of the Joker as a modern gangbanger, but it doesn't handle it in a real mature way. It doesn't feel very realistic, and it's a movie, I'm getting ahead of myself again, but it's a movie that cannot decide how grounded versus stylized it wants to be. David Ayer talks a lot in the behind the scenes about how important it was for him to ground things in reality. You always hear people with superhero movies say that, even in movies that I think are really ultra stylized like this one. It's one of the things I like about it, and going back right before this to BVS, that was the thing I appreciated about that movie. I didn't like the super muted color palette, but I did appreciate that it felt like a different reality, and it felt very comic book, and it felt like a world that doesn't really exist. And I get the idea of certain things needing to be grounded and more realistic, where you'll buy things that people are doing and saying and their motivations, the whole thing doesn't have to be like a really crazy over-the-top cartoon. I get that you want to root it in humanity. But the problem is, Ayer talks a lot about it almost as if he thinks he's making a Nolan movie or something. And I know he doesn't mean to come off that way, because that's clearly not what he's trying to make, but the whole thing is just very tonally confused, because it's like we can't have supervillain costumes because we want it to feel more grounded than that. He's got almost like a Bryan Singer kind of sensibility about it with X-Men. But you also live in a world where you have witches and a woman who has the soul of her husband in a sword, and it's a pre-existing comic book continuity that already has a lot of costumes and things. And there's also a lot of just really over-the-top, unrealistic things that happen in the movie, sometimes to cheat. And we're really concerned about... And I realize that David Ayer comes from a military background, and that's part of why he got this movie, because it's supposed to be a Black Ops film. And I wish the mission they go on was more interesting as a Black Ops thing. But in a movie where we're so concerned to make sure that all of the soldiers are holding their guns correctly and standing where they would really stand, and that we buy the strategies that whoever's in charge uses and stuff, you also have constantly machines coming out of the sky and crashing and nobody dying. Like, at that point, I just don't really care about the realism of your movie. And there's always gimmies in Hollywood, I get that. This goes too far with it for anybody to really be talking about things being grounded. Let's talk about good things. To me, anyway. So, some of the casting in this movie I like a lot. I think Amanda Waller is dead on. I think Viola Davis does a really great job, and I'm glad she came back for The Suicide Squad. I've only seen that movie one time, so I'm hesitating because I can't remember just how much she's in that. But I know she's in that. Deadshot is not Deadshot, but Will Smith does a really good job with what he's given. Now, I have to say, I'm not really buying him as a killer that is unhinged to the point where he cannot help but love what he does. I'm just not seeing that behind his eyes. Like, he's cast so we'll buy the I love my daughter part, not so that we'll buy the kind of crazed lunatic part of his personality. And maybe both things aren't really reconcilable. Or maybe I could be made to buy that with the right actor. But I think maybe, even though thematically I think it's potentially interesting in comparing him to Harley Quinn, I think the smarter move would have been to just leave the half psychotic thing off the table with that casting. Margot Robbie is brilliant as Harley Quinn. Even if I'm not in love with this particular version of her, she's just an incredible actress in general. And a lot of people have told me they want to see her continue to play Harley Quinn and just hope that she gets more cool material to play moving forward. And I have that as well, I suppose. I keep saying that I think the DCEU needs to flat out reboot entirely because there's so much baggage and I'm so confused as to what counts and what doesn't. I feel like we're retconning something every single movie. I can see Harley Quinn as maybe one of the only exceptions to that, were we to get a straight up reboot of all of this. And then Diablo as well. Like I said, that's a performance I really like. I like the stylized comic tone, like I said, even though I think it's pretty confused in a lot of places. There's some really good makeup work in this. The tattoos are obnoxious, and I don't mean to be a walking contradiction. I have gotten into tattoos myself. I really like them. It's a culture I have started to really come to appreciate. It's just excessive. There's just so much of it in this. It's like almost every single character has to be massively tatted up. And it doesn't help that it's really self-indulgent, right? They had a tattoo artist that they had on set, and they started doing tattoos for one character, and then it just snowballed, and they started going crazy with it, and they decided to have him do all these tattoos for all these different characters, and they all look like they're drawn by the same guy. That's part of the problem. And also, a lot of them just don't look real. They look kind of magic marker. I like the song in the credits at the end from the trailer, and I wish that had been the one, like, popular song in the movie, the one kind of incidental music choice, because we'll talk about this later, but one of the biggest issues that people have with this movie is that it is edited like a trailer, because it was edited by the guys that made the trailer that was very popular for this movie and made people want to see it, and I commend them on that trailer, but they weren't right for editing Ayer's movie for him. And that was a really good song choice. I think it fits. I think it would have really set the mood for the movie if we'd opened with it. And instead of doing this kind of jukebox musical thing almost, which I think also is just them ripping off of Guardians. We were talking about good things. Pardon me. I like that song. I want it to be like the Batman, where with the Nirvana song, where it's the song from this movie. Diablo is sympathetic, like I said before, and has some pathos. That's the thing I like in this movie. There is kind of a weird chemistry in certain moments with Joker and Harley that I'm not going to deny, even though I don't think Leto really has a take on the Joker, or if he does, I don't understand what it is. But I do kind of get them together every so often. So I'll give it that. It's a pre-existing superhero universe where everything doesn't have to have an origin, and I appreciate that. It's not all blended well, of course, but it because it holds our hands too much, and it almost doesn't even matter that all this stuff is pre-established. It almost would be better in some ways if it just went to straight up origin territory. In the first place, and establish some of these characters in their own movies before we got to this. Like, I want to really like that. I like that on paper. It's just that it's not executed very well in the movie, so it's difficult for me not to have the thing that a lot of people have with this, where they're like, well, I guess it has to be Avengers. I guess you can't have movies like this where this is your introduction to the characters on the team. No, you can, and the Suicide Squad handled it a lot better, even though some of those characters we knew before. It's just, if you haven't seen enough good examples, it's hard to believe that it's possible. But again, we're talking about good things. I like that the movie acknowledges how terrible an idea Task Force X is when Flag says, hey, Waller, it makes no sense. Why are we doing this? I'm glad that the movie is not pretending like Waller is right when she says, this is the only way we can deal with this threat. I don't fully understand why she's so obsessed with the idea. At the point where she really needs them, which very conveniently happens just as they're already putting them together, by the way, I get why now she's doubling down and it's really important to her. But before that, we discover that this has been a thing she's been trying to put into motion for apparently a long time. You got that senator at the beginning in the really awful, and goes on for all day long, dinner scene, the exposition stuff where we're just introducing all these characters, to then introduce them again later. And a couple of them we've already introduced. We have two characters that are introduced into the movie 3 times by like the half-hour mark. Anyway, but we find out there that she's actually been trying to get this going all along. Is it just because she's really sadistic and like can justify it, but just it's fun for her? She really wants to do this? I'm not totally sure. But I like that we're not pretending like it makes any sense. There is some reverence for the source material. The execution is really problematic, of course, but there are some scenes, like the Boomerang and Slipknot scene, that are straight out of the comics, and it's clear that Ayer really likes the Ostrander stuff. You see him looking at Ostrander comics on set. I don't think that's like a setup thing. I think he really does like that material, and you see several actors taking a look at that stuff too. And I think these guys really thought that this was just an intriguing idea, and they liked the source material. And I appreciate the, Ostrander building that he's given. His name is given kind of a big cameo in the movie. It's just execution problems. There is an attempt to give everybody one cool character moment at least. Doesn't always pan out, but there's an attempt. Deadshot occasionally has some good kind of clever lines. When they go to rescue Waller, not realizing it's Waller, he has that line where he says, "This dude better cure cancer after this S word." I think that's a funny line. I like that Waller is so ruthless, she does her own killing with her own gun. That does not belong into the super sappy movie where by the end, none of the Suicide Squad is allowed to die, and even the girl that the Enchantress took over makes it out alive by the end. This is a different movie. It becomes almost a Disney thing by the end. I'll go that far. It's like, oh, now it's a Marvel movie. Yeah, that's not what you set up, guys. Margot Robbie's performance on the cop car when she pretends she's not sad and the rest of the squad shows up, I think is a really good tender moment for her. And I like the bar scene in the extended cut better. I would like these people better, I should say, if that scene happened like a half hour earlier. And that leads me into the worst thing with this movie. We'll get into bad stuff now. We've been talking about bad stuff the whole time, but now I'm going to give you a laundry list of it. The structure is obviously the worst thing in this movie. It is one of the most disjointed and jarring, clunky, messy introductions to an ensemble cast I've ever seen. Never mind, it's not one of. It is absolutely the worst of those. It is a prologue that watches like a viral marketing video that's meant to supplement the movie. Like maybe you were supposed to look at it before you arrived. The movie actually starts 20 minutes in. It nearly has no second act. I think the second act of this movie is like 10 minutes long. It's like they crash in the helicopter and then they walk around town for a while and then they shoot up the guys with the eyes, and then your second act plot point is, oh, we were supposed to rescue Waller, it turns out. That's all you get for the second act, because the entire first act is setting up character and setting up character and setting up character. And then after everybody's introduced, it's time to set up more characters. At least in the extended cut, and a lot of the extra scenes in the extended cut happen after the hour mark. So it's not that different. I watched the extended cut second, and so that's what's most fresh in my mind. But it's not that different from the theatrical cut. In the extended cut, it is 48 minutes in, and we are still introducing characters. I think that's where Katana shows up. And you're like, this movie still hasn't gotten started. I couldn't stop having that thought the first time I saw this in the theater. When does the movie start? When does the movie actually start? And then, like I said, the third act is suddenly a completely different movie that does not earn the heart or the sappy family stuff. So the first part of this movie is essentially the first act, which is far too long, is just a prologue that, and by the way, that 20-minute setup is apparently, Austin mentioned this to me, I didn't realize this, is apparently a zero issue from I think some 2010s comics, unless it's an on-strander thing, I'm not sure. But apparently they just lifted that from a zero issue. That's not how you open a movie. And if you're going to open a movie that way, you don't want to then have scenes where it's like we're supposed to be meeting a character for the first time. I mean, first of all, how am I supposed to keep track of any of these people and remember anything that I've seen? We have a scene at the beginning to show you Deadshot and in prison, and then we have a flashback that shows you Deadshot doing mercenary things and the really contrived flashback with his daughter standing in front of Batman, which is awful. And then when he's handed a loaded weapon and he doesn't think he's going to be able to fire it, and then he demonstrates how good of a mark he is, how good of a marksman he is, I should say. I'm like, yeah, I already know that. Like, I've been seeing him shoot people this whole time. This is the introduction for this character, and I would be so much more invested in him if that's how I was introduced to him. What's weird is the movie gives us the gradual introducing characters and learning about them through a more, I'll just say more because it's not super well done, but a more naturally unfolding story than the clunky 20 minutes at the beginning. You don't need that. I can't believe both of those things are there. I can't believe that was all left in. Like I said, it was edited by the trailer editors, and that's a big mistake. It is baffling and incoherent like Snyder, as if that's the house style at the beginning of the DCEU. And then it was so shocking to me that Wonder Woman didn't feel as much that way. The humor feels like it's overcompensating for something. I mentioned that earlier. Characters having one prevailing flaw, and I don't really care what happens to most of them. Some of the action is just boring, sorry to say. Retconning the public's appreciation of Superman, I already mentioned that. We've got all these pointless flashbacks that are constantly taking us out of scene that aren't really doing anything to progress narrative at all. It feels like a TV show, and it wants to be a series, and I say this about a lot of stuff now, but I wonder if this might have been an HBO Max limited series or something were it done now. And obviously, the Suicide Squad movie just came out last year, but that's a movie for lots of different reasons that I won't get into, having to do with Gunn and his situation, and the fact that this was a movie in the first place and it made a bunch of money, so they wanted to get another one in the theater. There is no setup and payoff in this movie at all. All these disjointed elements that each could be their own movie, but they don't fit together to create anything cohesive. It's like looking at a bunch of puzzle pieces from different puzzles all thrown into a box together. Too many characters the story could do without. I'll just name a few of them. The Joker doesn't need to be in here. Is he one of the reasons that the movie made $750 million? You better believe it. And how many people walked out being really disappointed that they were duped into seeing it because of him? Katana doesn't need to be here. Killer Croc, completely pointless. Boomerang, not really. Nothing is done with these characters, thematically or otherwise. Overall, it has a fan fiction vibe. It is too cool for school. It's immature and edgy for its own sake. A lot of terrible exposition and dialogue. There's that infamous souls in the sword speech that Rick Flag has that people make fun of all the time. And it's just preposterous that he... Well, I'll get to that later. There's a whole inconsistency with his character that he would even say that. I'll get to that when we get to questions. There is too much incidental music. I mentioned that earlier. It's one of the things that makes it feel so fan filmy, because it's like when somebody makes a fan film that has no composer, where it's like, well, we have to find some music to go in here, and we're not selling it so we can use anything we want to, except this is selling it, and it all feels like temp music. And some of it doesn't even make any sense for the scene, where it just doesn't elevate what's happening in any way. It doesn't create any kind of subtext. Sometimes it'll be that annoying TV on the nose thing where it's almost narrating the scene. More often, it's just a baffling choice. What is with You Don't Own Me? Harley Quinn's whole thing in this movie, anyway, is that she's codependent and that the Joker owns her. And when we first meet her, it's You Don't Own Me. Maybe it's the prison that doesn't own her, but somebody else does. Maybe that's what that song's getting at. And then it's also weird that the opening song in the movie is actually incidental music in the textbook sense, where it's something that somebody is listening to in the prison, and then we just forget about that after that. All the music, all the rock music and stuff is just scoring the movie and isn't actually part of the scene. It's like they took a cue from Guardians at first, where they went, oh, it should be music, and I don't mean to say that you always have to do this, but, oh, it should be music that's actually in the world that also serves to score the scene. But why are they so inconsistent with it? Why do they just quit doing that after that? I'm not sure it ever happens again. It's insanely careless. And then it's weird that Enchantress's brother's name is Incubus. Because if I'm going to use a lot of incidental music and popular music in this movie, I might go to the band Incubus. That could be fun. And some of that music would, I think, fit this okay. I thought about playing in with Incubus music, but I didn't want to get copyright flag. Maybe that band should have done the soundtrack. Joker is not scary or funny or surprising or anything. I think the modern gangbanger thing, at least the way it's handled in this, makes him really generic. Tuco in Breaking Bad is a better Joker. At least the theatrical version totally misses the point of the Joker-Harley relationship as Paul Dini originally wrote it. That's not to say, as I always say, that you can't do it differently and that you can't win me over on it. But it does feel like change for the sake of change here, and it also feels like if there's not a malicious ulterior motive, it watches like there could be, and that's really unfortunate. It feels like, and I know I'm not alone on my own little cloud on this. I know other people feel this way. It seems to glorify that relationship, and there were already girls that were kind of doing that wanted to be a Harley Quinn and liked the idea of this kind of abusive relationship, or were maybe trying to use Harley Quinn to justify that they were in a relationship like that. That's scary. That's not good. I'm not saying the movie's doing it on purpose. The theatrical cut, anyway, comes off that way to me. The extended cut a little bit less so, because she kind of wins him over. Although you could make the argument that makes it worse, I guess. But I'm a little bit baffled by this choice, where in the extended cut, when we get the extra scenes, which in some ways make it better, I guess, but it also just makes the whole thing more convoluted as a choice, where Harley Quinn is enamored with the Joker in the first place as a therapist, Harleen Quinzel, and then the Joker lobotomizes her, and she resists that. She's like, I can take it, but it's like she's trying to be strong and put up a good front, a good face, but she knows this has all gone too far. And then he's basically reprogrammed her like RoboCop or something, and now she is his to do with as he pleases, but he's not interested in her romantically or otherwise. Now it's like she was a fun plaything for a while, I guess. We don't spend enough time with it to really know why the Joker is doing any of that to her. It seems like an almost revenge kind of thing at first. And then he's like, look, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. And then she proves just how loyal she is to him. And finally, he seems to get off on that and turns her into something even closer to himself, throwing her into the vat of acid. So it starts, in the extended cut anyway, from a more traditional place of the Joker doesn't actually care anything about Harley Quinn. But it still turns into, like I said earlier, that Bonnie and Clyde thing where they are joined at the hip and are really actually in love, and you have this love motif through the whole thing, and then at the very end, the Joker breaks her out of prison, and it plays like that's supposed to be a reward for her, and I can't decide if it's supposed to be twisted or uncomfortable or messed up or not, because she and Deadshot, like I said, play like, at least the way their characters complement each other thematically, like the main characters of the piece. And he is sort of reunited with his daughter at the end, and that's supposed to be tender, and it's not supposed to be disturbing. There's a little bit of black comedy in, and I like this, by the way, there's a little bit of black comedy in they're doing a math problem together about him shooting somebody from a roof and the hypotenuse of the triangle and all of that, but overall it's not supposed to be messed up, and hers is. I don't know if the movie has decided if that's a problem or not. It also, and I'm saying this in hindsight, of course, but I could have been won over on it after this movie in sequels, potentially, if only we continued to explore that relationship. But then she becomes emancipated in Birds of Prey, and their breakup happens totally off screen. And that's a massive mistake, I think, whether it's a soft reboot kind of thing or not. It's weird that we have three completely different Harley Quinns played by the same actor now in three different movies. Or at least, that's what it seems like to me right now, because I haven't seen the Suicide Squad more than the one time. But I don't think she's really played like she is in Harley Quinn in that. We talked about the over-sexualized eye candy with Harley Quinn, and that it wants to be Guardians. It's tonally confused. I would say the visual style and detail in this movie are like the special effects in the Star Wars prequels. The tattoos are all the stuff like in Star Wars, all of the special effects, the ships and things that are just all over the screen. Like it's masking something. Like it's supposed to be the substance. It doesn't serve the story. There's no real thematic or character substance to all that stuff. More is more. It's self-indulgent. And the tattoos themselves are indicative of the way the movie is conceived. We cover up the lack of substance with a ton of surface stuff to distract us. Isn't it impressive, all this makeup that these actors had to go through? And they must be really complex characters with this whole life story written all over them that I don't really understand or appreciate beyond, Harley Quinn is wearing a pendant that says Puddin', because that's what she calls the Joker, and he has damage written across his forehead, because he is that. There's not enough script, it's too improvised, I talked about that. This movie, I think the best way I can put it is a microwaved steak. You take a steak, and instead of cooking it the normal way, like a normal person, putting it on the stove, you put it in the microwave. It's overdone. It's not prepared right. And then you gotta put a bunch of steak sauce on it to mask the toughness and the lack of flavor. Like Man of Steel, there are also lots of interesting visual details that really talented artists put into the production that the story and the film coverage doesn't do anything with. There are special features that show us some of these things where a lot of thought was put into stuff that just doesn't really make it to screen. Like Harley Quinn has a gun where apparently she keeps track of everybody she's killed with it, and I can't remember if it's tally marks or what, but you see that on the side of the gun. And I don't remember noticing that anywhere in the movie. And again, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm saying the movie shouldn't hold our hands as much as it does, and it's nice if you have some visual storytelling, but you gotta shoot it right. And it's not as bad as Man of Steel in that they're at least establishing shots for locations and things. You have the Ostrander building. I remember in the theater seeing the Ostrander building and going, oh good, I see the place we're going. They don't just walk into a building where the camera is inside and they start walking around. You actually see what the place looks like, because Snyder is terrible at giving us that. But that's like basic filmmaking 101 stuff that we should really expect to get. Own that S word, that line in the bar scene that Harley Quinn says is unintentionally hilarious. It's supposed to be a really dramatic beat. It's not. It's really funny. There's not enough in common to pull the team or the story together. Like I said, is it just that they all fell in love, that they all feel love? Not even fall in love. They feel love. Okay. I'm trying to decide if Diablo is supposed to be a foil for the Joker or not. There's this weird line about how Diablo loses his queen, and that's talked about with the Joker too, that like Harley Quinn is his queen and he's lost her. And like Diablo, obviously it's a completely different situation. Diablo accidentally murders his wife in a fit of rage with his fire ability. And then after that happens, he becomes a better person and he becomes a pacifist. And then the Joker created his queen, did it deliberately in a really sadistic, messed up kind of way, and then goes on a rampage to get her back. I don't know if there's supposed to be some kind of mirroring or parallel thing there, or if it's, and I have that with a lot of things in this movie, or if it's just totally arbitrary. Killer Croc's voice is awkward. I don't like that. The visions of their perfect lives at the end with the Enchantress, way too generic and obvious. And finally, Diablo's god thing at the end comes completely out of nowhere. I guess he just knew he could do that the whole time. He's like, let me show you what I can do. And then in Spanish, he's like, something B word. It's very silly. But yeah, I don't know where that came from. I don't know if he knew he could do that. I don't know if his god form is somehow related to them. Oh yeah, because he's not even speaking Spanish, is it? I think he's speaking whatever. Am I right about this? Somebody let me know in the comments. I think he's speaking whatever language the magic entities are speaking at the end, Enchantress and Incubus. I don't know. Okay, here's some missed opportunities. And this is the biggest one for me. Joker and Waller should be the villains. Joker doesn't even need to be there. Waller, in some ways, is a little too typical. And again, the way that they kind of fit as two sides of evil, I think works really well if only Joker were more in the fore and an actual threat in the movie. Why do we spend so many scenes? I say so many. It's a couple. It's too much for me. Why do we spend so much time with the Joker just trying to get to Harley Quinn? Like, if you had that one scene where there's the stupid guard at the prison who goes to the Joker and gives him information, and then the Joker showed up later, you wouldn't need to have all that stuff in the middle. It's almost like they went, well, we cast the Joker and people are going to want to see him. He doesn't really have anything to do in the story, so we got to come up with an excuse to keep putting him in scenes, even though we're not progressing narrative and he's not doing anything. So he'll just be flashbacks, and getting to her, I'll get to super chats here in a couple minutes, guys, thanks so much, and then we'll have him try to get to Harley Quinn and fail, and it'll play as real tragic for Harley Quinn, and then at the end he'll show up and get her out. Really? He's a glorified cameo. So this is the part where I'm going to rewrite the movie, and I try not to do this. I do think that this idea is a thing that would actually serve some of the things they're doing better, because we need... Maybe Waller is enough, maybe she's not. But again, I like the two sides of evil that you see with them, the order and the chaos. So if you had the Joker as the real threat, you'd have our villains who are being used as heroes fighting an actual supervillain. And when I went to the theater, I thought that was the whole point of having the Joker in this movie. They're not real heroes. They have to play the part of heroes. Can they pull that off? And I guess they do, up against a really boring, uninteresting, typical magic villain. But if it's them versus the Joker, isn't that just inherently more interesting? Especially with Harley Quinn's, where Harley Quinn would have a difficulty deciding where her loyalty lies. When he shows up, what I really thought was going to happen in the theater, and shocked that it didn't, because we make such a big deal out of the phone that Amanda Waller and, well, I guess that Rick Flag has, where he can blow up any of the Suicide Squad at any time like he does with Slipknot. What if the Joker got the phone? That's really what I thought was going to happen. He shows up, he tries to get Harley Quinn, she can't get into the helicopter with him. And then he is raising hell trying to get her back. And Rick Flag drops that darn phone. And the Joker gets his hands on it. And the Joker goes, now I have the power. Now I can force these people to do anything I want. That's horrifying. Suddenly he's so much scarier than any of them could be, and they're put in this like really vulnerable position. I wanted to see that movie, and I just think that it's such a missed opportunity not to. It wouldn't have to be exactly that. I think that's such a neat idea. I wish they'd gone with it. And again, that's not me tooting my own horn and saying, look at this awesome idea I have. I thought that's where it was going, and I was really disappointed when they didn't do either that or something cool with the Joker, regardless of my not being quite won over with his with Leto's performance. He didn't get much to do apart from the flashbacks with Harley Quinn. Maybe if he was actually... And I'm finding I don't really care for this actor, because he's not great with Morbius either. He's not terrible in that, but I haven't seen him in much else. All I'm saying is if he was actually essential to the plot, maybe I would have liked him more. Or could have been won over on him. I also think that the Suicide Squad needs to be led, or needs to be one of the big things that leads to the Justice League in this world, if all of this is supposed to be a shared universe. And it sort of is in a superficial way with the mid-credits scene with Batman, but I really wish that there was some discussion about it in Justice League. And even the Snyder Cut doesn't really talk about it, where we have what feels like this very cynical, ultra-dark universe where nobody believes in heroes anymore. This movie ruins that because we retroactively say people believed in Superman, basically. He shared our values. Are you sure about that? How do you know that? He killed Doomsday. Okay. I don't think it tells you anything. Like, yay, thanks for saving us, I guess. Does she have any idea that Doomsday was the clone of the guy that he killed in his movie that made people not trust him and think that he doesn't care about them because of collateral damage? I don't know. Maybe she doesn't know that. But I digress. It would be a really cool roundabout way to get to the Justice League, and would really, whereas like we have to get back to altruism, we have to get back to the golden age roots of comics. Not to say that suddenly you have to have perfect characters and nobody can be flawed and you can't have any realism in your superhero movies, but it would be a really cool way to get to that same Avengers idea of there was an idea and it's maybe old-fashioned, and I think maybe even a cleverer way to do it than that did. But it feels so counterintuitive to start with a Suicide Squad before you get Justice League if you don't do it that way, because this movie screams there are so many superhero movies. What if we had a bunch of anti-heroes that were in a team together? But in universe, we haven't seen a lot of heroes yet, and we've gotten glimpses of them, and we don't even know if they're actually really active, and people don't seem to really know about them. So you have this really strange notion of Batman's been operating for, when you look at this with BVS, Batman's been operating for all this time, and Superman just showed up. Here's all these supervillains running around in a world where we're pretending like it's a big superhero universe, and has been, even though the previous movies kind of made it seem like it's just pockets, it's just Batman, and then Superman just now showed up. But now there's all this stuff that people are familiar with supervillains. It's very strange. Okay, I'm going to read this other super chat I have. If you guys have anything that I've not talked about yet that you want to make sure that I talk about, feel free to put those in the comments. And then I'm going to do a laundry list of questions, which is really fun to do with not very good movies, as I learned a few weeks ago with Star Wars Episode 2. And this is probably going to continue to be a regular feature on the show now. The Recovery 716 is a name I don't recognize. Welcome, $4.99 super chat. I wish the Joker would have been the main villain, right? Instead of the CGI monster at the end. I thought Leto would have been good. Didn't WB cut his scenes too? Yeah, I have no idea, and maybe there's information about this and I just didn't find it in my research. I don't know if there's a lot more than what was put in the extended cut. He made a big deal after the theatrical version came out where he said, everybody, we had really great scenes, you didn't get to see them. He might have just been talking about the couple of things that got put in the extended cut. I'm not sure. And if anybody knows, feel free to mention in the comments. I haven't looked at all the special features on the disc. There might be even other deleted scenes that I didn't see. I don't think there are. There's like a really short blooper reel, but I didn't see any other footage besides that. AMC Comics, hey Cap, Jared Leto was also in Phone Booth for like 5 seconds, remember? Oh yeah, at the beginning, was he the jerk face guy walking down the street before Colin Farrell gets in the phone booth? Is that him? I didn't realize that, if that's who that is. That's crazy. James Curry says he doubts it as far as Leto having very many more Joker scenes. Chewbacca's Lover, Cap, you like Jared Leto in Blade Runner. So, I guess Leto's in things I've seen, and I didn't realize that it was him. So that's cool. Senior Sticks. Kill Doomsday. He has our values. Exactly. He has our values. I don't think we should want Superman to have Amanda Waller's values. That would be very scary. Cherith Gerhardt. Welcome back, man. You had some great questions for the What If show last week. Hey Cap, do you feel either movie is comic book accurate? Because I don't. So I'm not a big Suicide Squad guy. It's a concept that I think is kind of interesting, but not really my bag, just as a thing I want to sit down and read. I've never been a big military guy, Black Ops guy. I've never been big into a lot of, like, villain-led stories, for the most part. Everybody's complicated. I have the pockets of things I like Venom and stuff, but even then, not usually when he's a villain. And I'm also not a big team book guy, I should say, besides X-Men. But from what I know of Suicide Squad, it's hard to say. It was such a weird choice of characters to all throw together. And of course, a lot of people complained about that. Some of the problem was just it was too many characters and they weren't blended well with this movie. That second movie had a lot of really random characters, and we actually, spoiler alert, killed some of them off through the movie. So that was cool. I feel like Suicide Squad as an idea, you can kind of use any villains you want to. And so I guess it's accurate in the sense that there are lots of different runs, and they use different groupings of characters, and they don't all have exactly the same tone. So when you say comic accurate, I'm not sure which series you're most familiar with, or if you mean just somehow the basic premise of Suicide Squad, this is missing. I don't really think it is. I think it gets Waller right for the most part. She's maybe more ruthless than some people would even want to see her go. I like that about it, actually. I'm sort of fine with that. By the way, Amanda Waller seems to be a bad omen for live-action superhero movies. Now, 2 does not a pattern make, but it's interesting that she's in Green Lantern, and that's supposed to be the beginning of a DC shared universe, and then that falls apart. And that actress is fine. She's not as good as Viola Davis. And then Amanda Waller shows up in this, and it's not the end of the DC extended universe, but it is the beginning of the end of this direction. And that's kind of interesting. Doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a really weird coincidence. Richard Tracy, Harley Quinn was indescribable in the Suicide Squad sequel. Yeah, I've heard people say they like her a lot better there, and I felt like she was kind of in the background for a lot of that. Again, spoilers for that. I didn't like, because I felt like every other character was expendable in that, and I didn't like thinking, well, there's no way they're going to kill off Harley Quinn in this movie. And then, of course, that doesn't happen, because I guess it can't, but it would have been nice to leave her out of it, and I don't know that she needed to be there to get people to go see that movie necessarily, especially because Birds of Prey tanked. So, she wasn't enough of a draw for her own movie. Some of that might have been word of mouth, too, but, Chewbacca's lover wasn't Amanda Waller in the Suicide Squad. Yes, she was. I'm just saying that we sort of soft rebooted Suicide Squad, like I said earlier, and we're kind of repositioning and going with different tactics and stuff. But it's just kind of funny to me that she's shown up in 2 movies that a lot of people didn't like, and DC has had to pivot every time. But I get it. 2 does not a pattern make. Richard Tracy, why were they trying to rescue Harley Quinn? You mean in The Suicide Squad? It's been a while, and I don't want to talk about that movie too much right now, since we're reviewing this. But yeah, she did seem kind of shoved in there, and but I don't know, it is a much better, more watchable movie than this. I'm going to go ahead and go to questions now, and my questions about this movie, things that don't make sense to me and that I don't understand. And I wrote probably more than I'm going to use, so bear with me and let me jump around a little bit. Why do authorities, and this was a question I had with BVS, but I'm going to ask it again because I hate it and it drives me crazy. Why do authorities assume metahumans are everywhere? Because there was an alien that had superpowers with Superman. I mean, he came from another planet. How is he a metahuman? I guess the idea here is that there were all these other metahumans, and then we were already calling them that. So it makes a little bit more sense than BVS. It feels like we've already kind of retconned it, because the discussion that we have there is there's this guy from another planet that has superpowers. That must mean that there are people everywhere on Earth with superpowers. It's really silly, the whole metahuman thesis thing. We're still sort of talking about it like that here, except I guess there are metahumans around already, and we're already familiar with them. I don't know, that whole thing is just confused and strange. And then there's the question of how much of a secret metahumans are. Why do we meet only Deadshot and Harley before the introduction dinner exposition fest? Like I said, they have 3 different introductions in this movie. Are they supposed to be dual protagonists or not? I already asked this, but Waller, how did Superman share our values? He never talked about anything publicly, and people thought he was a murderer. Was that ever resolved? I mean, you've decided what he stood for because he died in a fight with Doomsday. Why is Waller so obsessed with making Task Force X before the Enchantress thing happens? I don't fully understand that. Why does she think that the Suicide Squad will be more effective in accomplishing this goal than a regular Black Ops team? Especially because she also sends with them a regular Black Ops team. Are the powers that they have that much more helpful? This whole premise is faulty. We go at the beginning. The whole premise is like it's so confused from conception, and this is how it was sold in the trailers too. It was, well, the next Superman might not be on our side, so we need to recruit metahumans that we can control, and we just happen to not know any that are actually on our side. Did I just say actually twice? My apologies. So what we'll do is put bombs in people's heads that we have already that have powers. And it sounds like a crazy lunatic idea, but they're really powerful, and we can solve all kinds of problems with them. Are they, though? Because, and Avengers had this problem a little bit. This has it way more. How many of the characters that you recruited for the Suicide Squad, that you were forcing to do this, that don't want to be there, that will backstab you if they have a chance, aren't even metahumans? And here are the powers you do have. You got 2 guys with perfect aim. 2. One can only do it with a boomerang. The other one with guns. You have a crocodile guy who has some strength, I guess, and if you let him eat people, he'll get their powers, which you never let him do. You have a witch who is the whole reason that you end up having to use the Suicide Squad and is no longer on your side. And then you have 3 people with no powers at all. Arguably, only 2 of them even classify as metahuman. I don't understand. What a super convoluted way for Waller to get Deadshot arrested in the flashback. How did she know that his daughter was going to stand in the way and try to protect Batman? Because that whole situation has to happen precisely the way it does for him to get arrested. And it would be one thing if she just sent Batman there to try to get Deadshot arrested. But she says that she was using his daughter for leverage. So that was her whole plan, was like, get them in an alley, have Batman show up to distract Deadshot's daughter, or to distract Deadshot because his daughter would be like, oh no, daddy, don't shoot him. So we have that, like, easy master manipulator thing, where the master manipulator knows exactly what's going to happen because the script has been written already. It's very silly. And then, like, the cops just show up. Here's a $5 super chat from Bob the Hun. Thanks very much. Birds of Prey would have made money if they didn't de-sexy Harley. Not saying that's right or would make it good, but it would have been a draw, especially rated R. Here's why I don't know if I agree with you on that. I don't know that it's all about her wearing skimpy clothes and being, sexualized and all of that. I think a lot of people that did see that movie maybe didn't like it, partly because it did seem a little in your face about the whole emancipation part of it. That's a really terrible title. People weren't real impressed with this movie, so like any sequel to this that put her that much in the forefront It's hard to say how well that would do. I don't know that I still say I don't know if she had to be in the Suicide Squad for that movie to perform. I think that had a lot to do with Gunn. I think the word of mouth got around. That's the next thing that he's doing after. And also, I don't know how much money that made because it was during the whole COVID thing and people were able to watch it at home. So, to be fair, it seemed like it was successful. I really don't know how well that movie did. I'm sure, I really don't think it would have done the numbers this did. But, yeah, I don't know, Bob the Hun, how much that actually had to do with it. Okay, more questions. There's so many questions. How am I expected to read all the information you're spewing on the screen at the beginning of the character introductions? You know, all of the, like I said earlier, viral marketing that you're putting in the movie. How do I know what's important to keep track of? This is not what I mean when I praise movies for needing to be seen several times. Why do we keep teasing the death of Robin? Again, I'm saying this in hindsight, but like, we've never gotten to what exactly happened with all that. There's like now 2 movies in a row. It's like Joker killed Robin. Joker killed Robin. Harley Quinn was his accomplice in killing Robin. Like maybe the Flash will finally deal with it. What is the point of the scene where Joker kills a man in the flashback for saying he's lucky he has a hot girl? Like I guess Joker's easily jealous, or he'll kill for anything. Was it just supposed to be kind of unnerving and ominous? It's, oh man, it's the Joker. He's totally gonna kill this guy. It's a really weird and pointless scene. Why does Harley color her hair like Neapolitan ice cream? How does that jerk prison officer guy not die a horrible death? Like, he's in scenes over and over again at the beginning, just screaming, look how awful this guy is. He's misogynistic. He's racist. He's mean to everybody. And he's supposed to be comic relief. Like, it's supposed to be funny when he says, I want you to clear my browser history. It's not. And then, like, he has to be Joker's way to find Harley. I'm surprised we didn't use that as an excuse to kill him. Again, no setup and payoff. It seemed like this is a guy we're supposed to hate and we want to see die. He could get his own movie. He's still alive. I'm not saying that would ever happen. I'm just saying, he's, as far as I can tell, I think he's still alive. I just have too many of these, so I'm going to skip a couple here. How does the Joker's henchman know where Harley is? Well, I actually know the answer to this question, but I think it contradicts something we had earlier. So he says, hey, Joker, it's the scene with all the knives. You remember in the trailer, he's like, he's like laying on the ground, he's got all the knives. The henchman guy says there's a new law where the worst offenders go to Bel Rev. They say Bel Rev here. Smallville is pronounced Bel Reeve. I'm used to Bel Reeve. You know, E's at the end of words usually make a vowel in the middle long, but I guess it's Bel Rev now. Okay. But Waller said he put her in a hole and threw away the hole. She says that about Deadshot, but she says, if memory serves, that Harley was thrown in the same hole, which suggests it's a secret, but it's not a secret. Everybody knows where it is. So that's weird. Like, all you have to do to make that convenient is to not have that line there. You know what it probably was? Reshoots. Because I'm sure that Waller at the beginning of that dinner scene was a new scene that they shot because they were afraid that people wouldn't understand who all these characters were. So they overcompensated and made us sit around for 20 minutes being constantly bombarded by character introductions. And she goes, oh, I put him in a hole and threw away the hole. And they probably forgot that they had a guy later tell us exactly where it was. Am I wrong? I wonder if I'm wrong. A 199 super chat from The Recovery 716 again. Thanks so much. I wasn't a fan of the music video style editing. Neither was I. And clearly that's not what Ayer intended. And if memory serves, I think this was one of those situations where the director was like thrown out of the editing room and he wasn't allowed to be involved enough in post-production. I don't know how true that is. I remember reading that at the time. Bob the Hun, $5 super chat. I meant for normies and non-comic fans. He's going back to the Harley Quinn isn't dressed sexy enough thing. You would get the people who thought Thanos was Hellboy to go see it. We'd still have the same problems we had. I guess I'm not totally sure what you're getting at. I guess just that people would still go see. I think a lot of people didn't care for this movie though. Like even normies, as you're talking about. Like it again, it did well at the box office, but it didn't stick around. It didn't linger. People didn't keep going back to it. I never hear about this movie, and Harley Quinn was superficially, the look with this was iconic and a phenomenon because, like I said, I kept seeing it in cosplay and stuff. So maybe there's a little bit of truth to what you're saying. I'm not sure. I suspect, though, that she could have been wearing exactly the outfit she's wearing here, and Birds of Prey could have come out and done exactly the money it did. That's my instinct. I don't know if I'm right about that. Or at the very least, it could have had a better... Some of it's just the way that movie was advertised, too. But, I mean, it could have had a better opening weekend and then fallen off after that. But also, if you did what you're talking about, the whole premise of the movie would probably be different anyway. So it's a difficult conversation to have because the material would not have been the same material probably if it came from a more, look how sexy Harley Quinn is kind of place. Anyway, isn't it convenient that the Enchantress makes her move just as the Suicide Squad is being recruited? Why does this have such a similar bad guy plot to Man of Steel? You have a superior being trying to build a weapon that will wipe out humanity. I mean, for different reasons, but it feels really similar because they both end up having giant lights in the sky that are weapons. One of them is a terraforming machine, but they're both weapons, and it feels really similar. How insane is Harley really? I'm asking myself that through the entire movie. Why not put Slipknot in the opening so I wouldn't call he's gonna die? I can't believe it's edited like this. How are we still introducing, I know I said this earlier, new members of the Suicide Squad after the forced and clunky opening bit with here's all the characters? You would put Slipknot in there, and you would put him in all the advertising, I would think, so that nobody would expect that he was going to die right away, and that would be a funnier moment. And then, of course, later Deadpool 2 comes along and does that moment with a whole team full of heroes, kills all of them, and blows that totally out of the water, comedically. But also, if Slipknot was in the opening and we made a bigger deal out of him like he was going to be a major player, we could do what we should have done with Incubus and also put that band in the soundtrack as well. Some of the stuff I've already brought up. How grounded or heightened does the movie really want to be? We talked about that. Okay, here's the big one. I've been complaining about this forever since the movie came out. I'm so excited to finally talk about this in a rewind. What shoots the helicopter down? So the Suicide Squad all gets on a helicopter, and they go over Midway City, and the squad is told that it's just a regular terrorist thing, and of course Will Smith doesn't believe it, and then the plane gets shot down, and everybody survives, everybody's fine, and they all get out and they start walking around. And then the very next thing that happens is Boomerang tells Slipknot, hey, I don't think the things in our brain are real, and we're not going to blow up, and we should just get out of here. And Slipknot says, sure, and he runs off, and then he dies. And that's supposed to be really funny. And it's supposed to be great because it's right out of the comic. Okay, but like nobody's asking what shot our plane down, or a plane, or a helicopter. I was so distracted by that for like the rest of the movie. I was like, there's a scene cut. There has to be. Surely the story at some point knew what shot the helicopter down. There's no way that you storyboarded it like this. Okay, so what are we going to have happen? They're flying, and then, boom, they fall down. And there's no explanation as to what shoots the helicopter down. It's insane. I remember thinking, maybe I missed something. Maybe it was Joker. Joker's not there yet. It's not like he's standing around watching them fight a bunch of zombies with eyeballs all over their faces before he finally comes in and tries to rescue Harley Quinn. Also, because he had to break into the other helicopter and steal it. It doesn't make any sense. I just don't even understand how that happened. And then I thought, okay, we got the extended cut, and that scene's going to come back, and we're going to understand what shot it down. And there's not a scene there. I'm not sure there ever was one. And so then I went in and I looked at the synopsis on Wikipedia, and it's hilarious because the synopsis says, and then the helicopter gets shot down. And if you were reading this having not seen the movie, you'd be like, why does that happen? No one knows. Okay, folks, we've got probably another 15, 20 minutes of stuff here, maybe just 10, and I will happily answer more questions as well. I'm going to take just a real quick break because I've been sitting here for a while, and I'll be back in just 2 minutes, and we will wrap things up. Okay, I'm back. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Hey, here's a question. Why is Deadshot an idiot? No, really. He plans to take out all the soldiers and the Suicide Squad will escape. But Waller can still kill them, even if they killed Flag. And I don't think there's even any talk about that. Like, okay, we'll take out Flag and then he can't kill us. He's just, like, talking to the other members of the squad, like, we can take out these military guys, no problem, and then we can escape. But the only thing is, like, he's planning this. He's going to do it. He's crazy. What is he talking about? And it doesn't go with what's going to happen later either, because then there's talk about how if he, takes out Flag or something, he's going to die. So, like, it's really inconsistent. He's like, well, we're stuck. What are we going to do? But why isn't he saying that now? And then the only thing that saves them is that Deadshot gets distracted by the zombie creatures. Okay, so the movie should have been over, like, 10 minutes into what is the actual movie. Like, if you take out all the fluff that's pointless at the beginning, the whole movie is like 10 to 20 minutes long, if that were to happen. It's kind of hilarious. I don't understand what the whole point is with the repeated thing about Deadshot not liking to be threatened. It amounts to nothing. It comes up a couple times and then never again. Again, there's no setup and payoff. Why does Rick Flag think he's better than Deadshot when he says, when the shooting starts, you'll cut and run? Like, he's forced to do this with a bomb in his head. You're not, like, it's like, oh man, I'm so much more noble than you because I care about the members of my team and I wouldn't run off. And, like, yeah, he's forced to do this. Like, of course he would cut. You would too. Like, it doesn't matter what your values or morals are or anything. If somebody forces you to do something at gunpoint, you're going to try to get out of that situation at any point. And then, related to that, why is Flag then impressed with Deadshot for not cutting and running? Like, if he does that, then he'll be killed, like I said earlier. Now he's coming to his senses, and he goes, he even yells to Harley, like, if he dies, we die. So we can't run off. And then there's this shot where Flag's like, oh my gosh, I misjudged him. Maybe he's better than I thought he was. All these people are idiots. Like, they're not acting like real people. In the moment, if you're not paying attention, yeah, it's like Spawn comics. It's like if you read, early McFarlane Spawn comics, like, you haven't read any Spawn at all, and then suddenly you read, like, issue 85. There's probably stuff that seems like it should make sense, but you read the rest of it, you're like, what in the world is going on? This doesn't make any sense. That's what this is like. If you watched any scene out of context, you'd probably thought that the movie made sense. Then you put it all together, and it's a disaster. Why does Incubus look so much like Steppenwolf will later? And why do all these villains have band names for names? I'd never had this thought before, but I don't know why Jared Leto's Joker does a George W. Bush impression every so often. Why would you cut the part in the extended cut where Harley actually does therapy stuff? There's like one token scene where she's psychoanalyzing everybody. Yeah, that's like a major character history thing. You leave that in. It's not that long. I've always been baffled by this. There's a flashback where Joker says, it's in both cuts. It's when she, and I like how this is shot, but it's when he throws her in the vat of acid to Jokerify her, and he goes, would you die for me? And she goes, yes. And he's like, well, that was too easy. Would you live for me? And she's like, yes. And he goes, you're so good. And I don't know what that means. I don't know. I don't know if he just means good, like, this is messed up, but good, like, good girl, like, you're so loyal to me, like that, or like, you're shockingly innocent and a good person, or something. If it's that second thing, in the extended cut anyway, the last time we saw her in a flashback, she murdered a man on the street right in front of him. So she's not good, but I don't know what he means by that. Another Leto acting thing that I had not thought of before, but there are points where it seems like he's almost doing a Joker performance and a Riddler performance at the same time. Like he's merging them somehow. He's having an internal war of jokes and riddles. Why does Deadshot even pull the trigger if he's not going to kill Harley when she's dangling out of the helicopter? Except to try to fool the audience for a second. So Waller's like, hey, Deadshot, this is now a contract killing. If you kill Harley Quinn, I'll give you your freedom and let you go back and see your daughter. And he goes, oh, she's dead. And he pulls his gun out and he's going to shoot her. And then he hesitates because now they have like a rapport. And also Harley earlier made him feel bad by saying he was like a double crosser. And it was almost like a passive aggressive thing. And then he shoots and then she goes like this, so the audience will be like, oh no, he shot her, right? And then she comes back up, like, wee! And then you're like, why didn't you just put his gun down? Like, why shoot at all? I don't understand that. And I'm also not sure that he has enough of a rapport with her that he wouldn't just kill her, since it would give him everything he wants right now, and he is a bad person. Again, I get what the point is, what it's trying to do, I'm just not sure I buy it. This one's weird. I hadn't thought of this before. So, Enchantress is building this weapon. I don't really understand anything about it. It's just like a big engine thing. It's a weapon. Okay. She asks Waller how to destroy her armies. Like America's armies. Or the world's armies. But you're making a weapon. So, like, why do you need to know how to destroy armies if you're building a thing that would do that? It's a weapon. It's like a big weapon of mass destruction, I would assume. And because she's like, now that my heart is returned, I can build the weapon. How do you destroy your armies? It's not really much of a weapon if it can't do that. I don't understand that. Why not give us the flashback with Enchantress in the train station when it happens in sequence, instead of in a flashback? That was a thing I was baffled by on the big screen, because it doesn't really give us anything we don't know already. We don't stay with our protagonists and only know things they know. There's really not much mystery in this, except, oh wow, it's Waller in the building that we were trying to get. I wish it was handled that way, but it's not, so there's no reason to get that in a flashback. It's insanely clunky. When did Deadshot get time to read the whole folder about Enchantress? He's like, Rick Flag in the bar is like, did you get to the part where I was sleeping with her? You know, like he's reading a Harlequin romance novel, and he's like, yeah, I read that part. You threw the notebook. I don't know if he even picked it up. Do we even see him pick it up? Maybe so. He throws the notebook at the car, and he's like, hey now, Rick Flag, you jerk, tell us everything that's going on. And then he's like, you can kill me, I don't care, I'm gonna go get a drink. And then he goes in, and then no time passes. He just starts having a conversation. I guess time was supposed to have passed and he read all that. I'm not sure why all of the squad stays to finish the mission. Maybe so they won't be blamed for what the Enchantress is doing, or just generically because they're supposed to be a family now. I have just a few more of these left, guys. Why is the Enchantress's face in CG when it's just white makeup? I'm starting to get the sense that big scary villains at the end of superhero movies are supposed to be CG because Uncanny Valley makes them less human looking and creepier. Where it isn't that it's because there's things that we are trying to do that we can't do unless we use CG. It's, no, we know that she could just be standing there. It's just white makeup. Like, she's probably made up that way even. But if we make it CG, then she looks unreal and bizarre. She doesn't look like she's really there. Now she's like an animated character. That's why you don't do that if you don't have to. Why does Harley try to make Deadshot think she's serious about joining the Enchantress in the big climax? He could stop her to... he could try to stop her ruse. Or does she actually seriously consider it for a second? I'm not sure. This movie is so sappy, and there are no consequences or tragedy for anybody at the end. How come? Why is it not the same movie at the end that it is at the beginning? I guess they just all decided to be heroes at the end. It is not believable, and it feels emotional and manipulative. Even June makes it out alive at the end. Like, nobody loses anything. It's really typical superhero stuff. Would an ancient witch, and I'm going to have to go to a slightly vulgar thing for a minute, but I'm quoting, would an ancient witch who speaks in heightened Shakespearean-type language really say you don't have the balls just because it's a vulgar comedy? I think not. And then really, Croc's request from Waller at the end, when she was like, because Harley Quinn's like, I want an espresso machine, and she's like, does anybody else have a request? And Killer Croc, because he's, I mean, a lot of these characters are real one note and pretty generic, but he's probably the worst of all of that, because, and this is just an example of that, why is his request BET? Like, the Black Entertainment, what does the T stand for? Anyway, it's a channel. Like, just because he's black? Just like, we have a black Killer Croc, so he has to be like, I want the black channel. Okay. Do you really think your movie is good enough to get away with Bohemian Rhapsody just scoring a scene? I don't know very many movies at all that are good enough for Bohemian Rhapsody to score a scene. Even the film Bohemian Rhapsody isn't good enough for that. And I couldn't believe after the trailer, because there is a trailer that uses that, I couldn't believe it was in the movie. It blew my mind. I remember in the theater, or when I first saw the trailer, going, there's no way they used that in the movie. And then they did. And it was shocking. I also wonder if it wouldn't be super dangerous. What? I mean, I'm sure it would be, right? To give a murderer an espresso machine in a prison cell. Seems like a really terrible idea. Okay, I'm going to check for more comments real quick, and then we'll go to tweet-length reviews. And if you're watching live right now and you'd like to put in a tweet-length review, feel free. I have quite a few to read from Patreon. A $5 super chat will let you do that. And, I mean, if you want to write a shorter one for a $2 super chat or whatever, feel free. If it's a super chat, I will read it. I will read them. But all you have to do is put in a short review, and if you would, put in a point value, 0 to 4, which is the scale, we use on this show. So now I'm going to read the patrons' reviews. If you'd like to become a patron so that you can do this on the regular, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution. The $5 tier gets you access to this. At $10, you can be a Patreon producer, a Superhero Rewind producer, which lets you do a lot more things for the show and chat with me on Discord about superhero movies. I'm learning so much from our producers, and they're very involved in the show, and it's been just wonderful as I've been getting this back to weekly. And now I'm done with my commercial. Okay, tweet length reviews. Victor Herman, a textbook case of what can happen when you try to make art that pleases everybody. It ends up pleasing nobody. 1 out of 4. That's absolutely right. And there's always at least one tweet length review that says something so much more concise than I have been able to say at this entire almost 2-hour review. Malik Myers, I don't believe for a second there was ever a good version of this movie. I like Will Smith being Will Smith, but he isn't Deadshot, and his arc is painfully generic. Charisma will only get you so far. I despise how gaudy and aggressively hypersexualized they made Harley Quinn look, but I can't deny that Margot Robbie shines in the role, even with just passable dialogue. Viola Davis is well cast too, but there wasn't anything remotely positive ends for me. That's where anything remotely positive ends for me. Actors in fan films have given infinitely better performances than Jared Leto. I promise you I didn't read this before I wrote my notes, some of which are things that we're hearing right now. I'm agreeing a lot with Malik here. The writing isn't great either. There's no nuance beneath the chaos. Nuance or subtext, yeah? I think about this film as what elite film snobs have in their heads when they talk about comic book films, just a mess, with small, half-assed attempts at substance sprinkled throughout. 1 out of 4. Good review, Sakib Tariq. This is Katana. She's got my back. I would advise not getting killed by her. Her sword traps the souls of its victims. That automatically makes it a 1 out of 4. Hilarious review. Christian Ogden. Smith, Robbie, and Davis are really good in their roles. Some of the humor did work for me, and the action is fine if you're willing to turn your brain off. But the script has very much been there, done that. The villain sucks, and the less said about Leto, the better. I don't think it deserves to be seen as one of the worst in the genre, but I get why people don't like it. For me, it's a guilty pleasure. Thank God WB was willing to give it a second chance, because I thought Suicide Squad 2 and Peacemaker were great. I still haven't seen Peacemaker. 2.5 out of 4. Chewbacca's Lover. I liked it when I first saw it, but it sucks. The trailer was far better. And it is totally fair to compare it to the trailer because it kind of feels like a trailer for itself. That's me talking now. Michael Kulik. I like most of the cast and performances, but the movie as a whole is messy by just about every storytelling metric. The bits of characterization I do think work end up as frustrating indicators of a possibly better movie buried in a hack job edit. Lot of debate about whether there's a better movie lying around here somewhere. Not much else to say, really. 1.5 out of 4. Connor Nielsen. Is Suicide Squad the worst comic book movie? I'm not sure, but it's certainly a finalist contender. 0.5 out of 4. Ruthless Connor. Miguel R. In 280 characters or less, I have to explain Suicide Squad's boring, one-dimensional story, obnoxious and trashy aesthetic, cringeworthy dialogue, almost entirely forgettable cast, and infamously poor editing job. What is this? Some kind of tweet-linked review? 1 out of 4. That's fabulous. Well done. Hot soup. All condiments and no food. 1 out of 4. That's a great food metaphor. That's as good or better than mine. Thanks for all the tweet-linked reviews. Those were wonderful. Let's see if anybody in the comments has put any more. Yeah, not so far. So yeah, once again, if anybody live right now wants to put in a tweet-linked review, feel free to. There's some fun comments right now, but I'm going to go ahead and go on to my rating, folks. I'm going to go ahead and go with a 1.5 out of 4, I think. I didn't feel like I could go all the way to 2 with this one. I think I gave that to BVS. I think, or maybe BVS was even as low as 1.5. I forget now. But I won't continue to go on. You guys know my thoughts. And now let's go ahead and try to rank this. And that's going to be kind of a tall order, I think. But I went ahead and went with a different view of this time for those of you watching your screens. This might be a little bit easier for us to look at, and I can also edit it in Letterboxd as we're looking at it. So here are the twos. So the last two I have here is Haunted World of El Super Beasto. I don't know if I was right about that rating, but that's what I gave that back when I did that in the old 12 Days of Rewind from several years ago. The 1.5s start with Superman Doomsday. So that's the first question I have to ask myself, and I don't know where I'm putting this yet, is Suicide Squad better than the top couple? Ninja Turtles 2, Superman Doomsday. After Ninja Turtles 2, we have Rise of the Silver Surfer, Batman Returns. I should mention, by the way, because I really didn't talk about this too much, but back when Suicide Squad came out, I remember thinking that it was, at the time, the best of the three, just because it was more coherent and I understood what was going on. And I don't know if I agree with myself on that now. Like, it kind of felt like that at the time. And there are fewer baffling things, but it's also just a simpler story in general. But anyway, where am I gonna put this? This feels, and I always say this, but this feels kind of like an arbitrary exercise. Like, I think I like Last Stand better. I think I like Batman Returns better. The remake of RoboCop, I'm not sure. It's maybe on that same level. But, like, I don't know, Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance, I would rather watch again before their Spirit of Vengeance. I'd rather watch before this. Probably. I don't know. Green Lantern, I can make a lot of comparisons to and have. 2014 Ninja Turtles, I almost want to put this even above that. Boy, this is tough. I don't even know if I can do this right now. I wish I'd looked at this closer before we started. I think I want to put it maybe just above RoboCop, but then is it better than X-Men Origins? Would I put it above Power Rangers the movie? Now I'm questioning some of where these things are. I don't want to not rank it, but I'm not totally sure I can write off. Okay, I'm going to put it somewhere. Let's go ahead and look it up and throw it on here, shall we? So this is Suicide Squad. Follow me on Letterboxd if you want to take a closer look at this and tell me how insane and wrong this order is. I will probably agree with you. This needs an overhaul. Bad. It needs an overhaul real bad. Okay, just trying to get it up into the 1.5s here. Everybody bear with me, and then we will call it a wrap once I get this in here. Man, I mean, would I rather watch this over Spawn? God, I don't think I can put this all the way to the bottom, but there's a part of me that almost wants to. And then I know some of you guys won't agree with me with like things like Super, which I just didn't care for at all. Would I even put this over Power Rangers? I don't know. I think at the moment, I'm going to put it at the 118 spot. Just between Punisher Warzone and Ninja Turtles 2014. That could move. I got to put it somewhere. So that's where it's going to go right at this very moment. AMC Comics, I like Superman Doomsday way more than 1.5. Anybody else with me? I used to have that. Oh, pardon me. Let me get myself back on screen here. I used to have that at, I think, a 2 when I first reviewed it. But once I get into more story analysis, I just had issues upon issues with it. I did review Judge Dredd, the original movie from 1995. Okay, as always, guys, thanks so very much for watching. If you're watching live or after the fact, I'm going to go ahead and say thanks to the patrons, and then I'm going to reveal what I'm doing next time. Once again, if you'd like to become a Superhero Rewind Patreon producer. That's the $10 tier at patreon.com/geekvolution. You can get in the Discord there and chat with me about superhero movies. We have a lot of interesting discussions there. In the not too distant future, we're going to do our first meetup there. I need to get that scheduled, but we are going to start meeting up monthly and sometimes even watch movies together. You can vote there in the Rewind selection board to help me choose things. That's how this was chosen, and that's also how the movie for next time was chosen as well, and other cool perks there. You can also join at the $5 tier just to do tweet length reviews and all the other perks that you get on Patreon. And thanks to all of our patrons, but especially our Superhero Rewind producers, and I'm going to thank them all individually right now, including Wendell Jones, Thorne Jones, no relation, Miguel Rodriguez, Michael Gulick, Kareem Roberts, Jacob Schneider, Damon Begay, Checkers the Inventor, Thomas Edgehill, The Day Ghost, Super Billy, Stone Gassman, Michael Martin, Joshua Gulisano, John Sandoval, Jajira, Hot Soup, Goofster123, Elliot Slater, Dylan Musciello, Chewbacca's Lover, and Blake. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all of your support in all of the ways that you do that. Chewbacca's Lover says meet up. Yeah, I'm just talking about we'll do that over Discord or a Skype call, and we'll have a producer meeting for an hour or two, talk about the show, talk about superhero movies, and sometimes we'll watch something. Okay, next time I'm going to be tackling a animated superhero movie, and I do those fairly often because there's tons of them, and I'm trying to do every superhero movie ever made. So, I put nothing but animated Justice League movies on the poll for last time. I put 5 of them there, and the winner, maybe no surprise, and perhaps I should have saved this for just before The Flash comes out, but I'm going to be doing the Flashpoint Paradox, based on the Flashpoint event from comics, which started the shared universe for the DC animated movies that ended a couple of years ago, and that was mostly not great. The Flashpoint movie is okay. It's pretty fun. It will be interesting to talk about. I haven't watched it in a really long time. But that's what I'm going to be doing next time, so feel free to take a look at that before next time if you've not seen it before especially, and I think that one is on HBO Max right now, although I'm not 100% sure, but that is my plan for next Sunday. And then the week after that, I'm out of town, but I'm going to, if time permits, try to come back and do some kind of a show for you. It probably won't be a review, but I'll try to do some sort of interesting discussion show, or I might have to take a week off. But I have managed to do a full 2 months of these in a row every week, and I'm very excited about that. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you had a good time, and I will see you again with another one next week. You guys are wonderful, and I'll see you soon. Bye, folks.